The Montana highway vanished into a wall of white death. Owen Carter's knuckles went pale against the steering wheel as his truck crawled through the blizzard, 8-year-old Penny's breath fogging the passenger window. Scout erupted from the truck bed like a golden bolt of lightning. The retriever's powerful legs carved through knee-deep snow, his trained nose locked onto something Owen couldn't see. Blood. Dark crimson pooling beneath the pristine white. A woman's lifeless fingers clutched a police badge, her uniform torn and frozen. Scout dropped to his belly beside her motionless form, pressing his warm body against her chest, exactly as Lisa had trained him before cancer stole her away 3 years ago. The dog's eyes found Owen's through the swirling snow, and in that moment, everything Owen thought he knew about his quiet mountain town, his dead wife's secrets, and the dangerous game being played in the shadows, began to unravel. "Daddy, is she dead?" Penny's voice cut through the howling wind like broken glass. Owen knelt beside the unconscious woman, his calloused fingers searching for a pulse beneath her icy skin. There it was, faint, irregular, but alive. Scout's training kicked in with mechanical precision, the golden retriever positioning himself against her torso, sharing his body heat while his keen eyes scanned Owen's face for the next command. Lisa's voice echoed in Owen's memory from those long nights when she'd trained Scout for the mountain rescue team. The woman's lips had turned blue, her breathing shallow as paper, while Scout's warm fur pressed against her chest like a living blanket against the Montana cold that could kill within minutes. Owen pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, but the screen showed no signal bars. The blizzard had swallowed the mountain pass whole, cutting them off from civilization like a white curtain of death. "Get my coat from behind your seat, Penny." His daughter scrambled to obey, her small hands shaking as she passed him the heavy winter jacket. Owen wrapped it around the woman's shoulders, tucking the edges beneath Scout's warm body. The dog's tail wagged once, a signal Lisa had taught him to show he understood his role. Owen studied the woman's face for the first time, noting she was young, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair matted against her skull and a small scar above her left eyebrow that spoke of old violence. "We need to get her to the hospital." Owen scooped the woman into his arms, surprised by how light she felt, how fragile. Scout jumped gracefully into the truck bed, then immediately back out, circling the spot where they'd found her. Something had caught his attention again, his powerful nose working overtime in the bitter wind. Owen followed the dog's gaze to a set of tire tracks barely visible beneath the fresh snow, leading from the road to the embankment where the woman had been lying, then back to the asphalt. This wasn't an accident. Someone had dumped her here and left her to freeze to death. Scout's low growl confirmed what Owen's gut already knew, as through the swirling snow, a pair of headlights flickered in the distance, then disappeared into the white void. The Millbrook Falls Hospital smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Owen paced the waiting room while Penny curled up in a plastic chair, Scout lying protectively at her feet like a golden guardian. Dr. Martinez emerged from the emergency room, pulling off latex gloves with practiced efficiency that spoke of too many nights like this one. "She's alive, but barely. Hypothermia, possible concussion, and significant blood loss from a head wound." The doctor's expression grew more serious as he continued. "Another hour in that cold, and we'd be having a very different conversation." Owen's shoulders sagged with relief he didn't know he'd been carrying, but Dr. Martinez wasn't finished delivering bad news. "Can we see her?" Owen asked, but the doctor shook his head with professional sympathy. "She's unconscious. Probably will be for the next 24 hours. But Mr. Carter, there's something else you need to know." The doctor's voice dropped to a whisper that made Scout's ears perk up with sudden alertness. "The woman has defensive wounds on her hands and arms, cuts that suggest she fought back against an attacker. This wasn't an accident or a simple robbery gone wrong." Owen felt ice crystals forming in his veins as the implications sank in. Someone had tried to murder this woman, and now his family was connected to whatever dangerous game had nearly cost her life. Scout seemed to sense the shift in mood, his golden body pressing closer to Penny, as if shielding her from threats that were only beginning to materialize. Sheriff Henderson appeared in the waiting room like smoke made flesh, his presence filling the sterile space with an energy that made Scout's hackles rise and Penny instinctively move closer to her father. "Owen, heard you found somebody up on the pass." Henderson's pale eyes studied Owen's face with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey, his voice carrying undertones that Owen couldn't quite decipher. "Detective Rachel Brooks, according to her identification. She's not from around here. Came up from Denver on some kind of official business." The sheriff's gaze flicked to the golden retriever with something that might have been calculation, his next words carrying implications that made Owen's skin crawl. "Strange how your dog knew exactly where to find her in all that snow, almost like he was trained for it." Owen felt the weight of Henderson's suspicion like a physical force pressing against his chest. "Lisa trained Scout for basic search and rescue before she died. Mountain rescue team stuff. The dog's got a good nose, that's all." Henderson's smile never reached his eyes as he pulled out a small notebook and clicked his pen with mechanical precision that somehow sounded threatening in the hospital's quiet atmosphere. "I'll need a full statement about how you found Detective Brooks. Every detail you can remember, Owen." The sheriff's emphasis on "every" carried implications that made Rachel's blood run cold even in unconsciousness. "The state police will want to know why a Denver cop ended up half dead on our mountain pass." Henderson's emphasis on "our" sent chills down Owen's spine that had nothing to do with the cold outside, while Scout's growls grew deeper and more threatening until Owen placed a calming hand on the dog's head. 2 days later, Rachel Brooks opened her eyes in the hospital bed to find Owen sitting in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her, Scout curled at the foot of the bed like a golden guardian angel. "You're awake." Owen's voice carried relief mixed with curiosity, his dark eyes studying her face for signs of recognition or danger. "The doctors weren't sure when you'd come around. Said head injuries can be unpredictable." Rachel's hand moved instinctively to the bandage wrapped around her head, her fingers exploring the tender spot where someone had tried to crack her skull open like an egg. "How long have I been here?" Her voice came out as a whisper, dry as desert sand and rough with the effort of consciousness. 2 days. I'm Owen Carter. This is my daughter Penny, and that's Scout. We found you." Rachel's eyes focused on the golden retriever with sudden intensity, recognition flickering across her features like lightning illuminating a dark landscape. "Your dog saved my life." Rachel's words carried weight that Owen didn't fully understand, but Scout's tail wagged gently, as if he comprehended every syllable. She struggled to sit up, wincing as pain shot through her skull like electric fire racing along damaged nerve pathways. "I remember falling, hitting my head, and then warmth spreading through my chest. Incredible warmth that kept me from slipping away into the darkness." Scout seemed to understand her gratitude, moving closer to rest his massive head on the hospital bed's thin mattress. Rachel's eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with physical pain as she continued, "I was dying, could feel myself slipping away from everything that mattered, and then this golden angel appeared and wouldn't let me go." Owen felt his throat tighten with emotion. He thought he'd buried with Lisa, memories of his wife's training sessions flooding back with unexpected clarity. Penny bounced into the room carrying a paper cup of ice chips and her latest drawing, a crude but recognizable sketch of Scout lying next to a woman in the snow, their figures surrounded by swirling white that captured the blizzard's fury with 8-year-old artistic vision. "I drew you and Scout," she announced with the kind of pride that only children could muster over their creative efforts. Rachel accepted the drawing with trembling fingers, studying the child's interpretation of her rescue with eyes that saw far more than colored pencil marks on construction paper. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing this with me. Penny beamed and settled into the second plastic chair, clearly planning to stay for the long haul like a small sentinel guarding new family. Daddy says you're a police officer from Denver, which sounds really exciting. Why were you on our mountain? The innocent question hung in the air like a loaded gun, its implications far more dangerous than an 8-year-old could possibly understand. I was investigating something, Rachel said carefully, choosing her words like stepping stones across a rushing river that could sweep away everything she'd worked for. Sometimes police work takes you to unexpected places, places you never planned to visit, but end up being exactly where you need to be. Owen heard the evasion in her voice, but also the exhaustion that came from carrying secrets too heavy for one person to bear alone. Whatever had brought Detective Rachel Brooks to their mountain town, it had nearly gotten her killed in ways that suggested professional enemies rather than random violence. Scout seemed to sense the undercurrents of tension flowing through the room like an invisible river of danger. The golden retriever stood up on the bed, walked carefully over to Rachel, and placed his massive head on her lap with gentle precision that spoke of deliberate choice rather than casual affection. The gesture was so clearly intentional, so human in its empathy, that all three adults fell silent with wonder at the dog's extraordinary intelligence. Dr. Martinez returned with discharge papers and a prescription bottle that rattled like dice in a cup, the sound somehow ominous in the hospital room's artificial atmosphere. Miss Brooks, you're medically cleared to leave, but you'll need someone to monitor you for the next 72 hours due to concussion protocols. His professional demeanor couldn't quite hide the concern in his eyes as he continued, Head injuries can be unpredictable, especially when there's been significant trauma to the skull. Do you have family in the area who could provide that kind of supervision? Rachel's smile was as fragile as winter ice, her eyes reflecting a loneliness that spoke of years spent building walls instead of relationships. No family anywhere nearby, Doctor. I was planning to stay at the motor lodge until I felt better and could safely drive back to Denver. Owen found himself speaking before his brain could engage the filter of common sense that usually governed his interactions with strangers, especially attractive ones who carried badges and dangerous secrets. The motor lodge closed last month when old Murphy couldn't afford to keep it running anymore. The words created a problem that his heart immediately moved to solve with the kind of generosity that had gotten him into trouble before. You could stay with us, just until you're back on your feet and ready to handle whatever brought you to Montana. Penny clapped her hands together with delight that made Scout's tail wag in sympathetic approval, while Rachel's eyes showed surprise, gratitude, and something else, a wariness that spoke of secrets too dangerous to share with innocent families. The offer hung in the air between them like a bridge that could lead to safety or disaster, depending on forces none of them could control. Dr. Martinez nodded his approval, while Scout's gentle whine seemed to add his voice to the chorus, encouraging Rachel to accept help from people whose only crime was kindness to strangers. The Carter house sat at the end of Maple Street, like a Norman Rockwell painting come to life, complete with white picket fence, wraparound porch, and a tire swing that hung from the old oak tree in the front yard like a symbol of childhood innocence. Rachel noticed the details that spoke of a life interrupted by loss, the small garden that had been carefully maintained but lacked a woman's touch, the lace curtains that were clean but showed wear around the edges, and the framed photographs where one face had been carefully removed from family portraits with surgical precision. Owen carried her small overnight bag, while Scout trotted ahead, his tail serving as a golden flag, leading them toward something that felt dangerously close to home. Daddy, can Miss Rachel sleep in Mommy's old room? Penny asked with innocent directness that made both adults freeze like deer caught in headlights, the question hitting emotional landmines that neither had seen coming. The guest room will be perfect, Owen said quietly, his voice carrying old pain like sediment in a riverbed that had been disturbed by unexpected currents. Rachel caught his arm gently, her fingers light against his flannel sleeve, but firm enough to stop his forward momentum toward emotional disaster. Owen, if this is too difficult for your family, I can find somewhere else to stay. The last thing I want is to intrude on your memories or cause pain for you and Penny. Scout settled the matter by walking directly to the staircase and looking back at them expectantly, his message as clear as church bells ringing across the valley. Home meant safety, and safety was what Rachel needed right now more than pride or independence or the luxury of solving her own problems without help. Owen's smile was tentative, but genuine as he looked at his daughter and the woman who'd somehow become part of their story. Lisa would have insisted on helping, would have been furious if I'd let you leave without making sure you were completely recovered. That first night, Rachel lay awake in the guest room, listening to the sounds of a house settling into the rhythm of sleep, her mind too active for rest despite the exhaustion that pulled at her consciousness like an undertow. Scout had claimed a spot on the rug beside her bed, his breathing deep and even in the darkness while his ears remained alert for sounds that didn't belong in the peaceful Montana night. Through the thin walls, she could hear Owen moving around downstairs, the soft clink of dishes being washed, the whisper of papers being shuffled, the lonely sounds of a man trying to fill empty hours before bed with activities that wouldn't bring back the woman he'd lost. Her head still ached with the rhythm of her heartbeat, but the pain was manageable now, overshadowed by a different kind of discomfort that came from lying to good people who'd opened their home to a stranger. She was using their kindness as cover while she figured out how to finish her investigation without getting killed, turning their generosity into a shield against enemies who wouldn't hesitate to hurt innocent families. Owen's footsteps paused outside her door, and Rachel held her breath while listening to him whisper something to Scout in tones too low for human ears but perfectly audible to the golden retriever's sensitive hearing. She heard the soft sound of his boots on the stairs as he finally headed to his own room, probably to lie awake staring at the ceiling and wondering what he'd gotten his family into by helping a stranger. The golden retriever's head lifted briefly, his eyes catching the moonlight as he looked toward the door with intelligence that seemed almost supernatural in its depth and understanding. Scout settled back down with a contented sigh, his presence somehow managing to be both comforting and vigilant at the same time. Rachel reached down to stroke his fur, finding unexpected comfort in the warmth of his presence and the steady rhythm of his breathing. "What did you see out there, boy?" she whispered into the darkness. "What do you know that I don't about whoever tried to kill me?" Scout's tail thumped once against the floor, and Rachel could swear she saw understanding in his intelligent eyes that reflected moonlight like mirrors holding secrets. Morning brought the smell of bacon and coffee drifting up from the kitchen like promises of normalcy in a world that had suddenly become far too dangerous for innocent families. Rachel found Owen standing at the stove, wearing a blue flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better years, his dark hair still damp from the shower, while steam rose from his coffee mug like incense in a peaceful temple. Penny sat at the kitchen table working on homework with the determined concentration that 8-year-olds brought to important tasks, her tongue poking out slightly, while Scout lay nearby in his self-appointed role as guardian and friend. "Good morning," Owen said without turning around, somehow knowing she was there through the kind of domestic telepathy that developed between people sharing close quarters. "How's the head feeling this morning? Any dizziness or nausea that we should worry about?" Rachel touched the bandage gingerly, surprised to find the pain had diminished overnight to a manageable throb that no longer threatened to split her skull in half. "Much better, thank you." She meant it more than he could possibly know, because after 2 years of hotel rooms and anonymous apartments, waking up in a real home felt like emerging from a cave into sunlight that warmed more than just skin. "This is incredibly kind of you both, letting a stranger impose on your family routine like this." Owen turned to face her with a smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to genuinely attractive in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance and everything to do with the kind of character that showed up in crisis situations. "Miss Rachel, do you have kids of your own somewhere?" Penny's question was innocent, but loaded with the kind of emotional landmines that 8-year-olds scattered without thinking, their curiosity unlimited by adult understanding of appropriate boundaries. Rachel poured herself coffee from the pot Owen had left warming, using the mundane action to buy time while she formulated an answer that wouldn't hurt anyone or reveal too much about her own carefully guarded solitude. "No kids, sweetheart. My job keeps me pretty busy traveling around and working cases that take me away from home for weeks at a time." It was true enough, though it didn't capture the loneliness of choosing career over family, investigation over intimacy, justice over the kind of personal happiness that required staying in one place long enough to build something lasting. Owen flipped the bacon with practiced efficiency, but Rachel caught the way his shoulders tensed at Penny's question, his body language suggesting he understood what it meant to build a life around absence and loss. Scout padded over to Rachel and leaned against her legs, offering comfort without being asked, while his intelligent eyes seemed to recognize the sadness she tried to keep hidden behind professional competence. The golden retriever had an uncanny ability to sense emotional needs and respond with exactly the right kind of support, whether that meant sharing body heat with a dying woman or providing silent companionship to someone whose life had been stripped down to duty and solitude. Sheriff Henderson chose that moment to knock on the front door, his timing so perfect it felt orchestrated by forces that understood how to maximize psychological pressure. Scout's hackles rose immediately, his friendly demeanor transforming into something protective and primal that spoke of instincts deeper than training. Owen wiped his hands on a dish towel and headed for the door, but not before Rachel caught the flash of annoyance that crossed his features like storm clouds gathering on a clear horizon. Through the kitchen window, she could see Henderson's patrol car parked at the curb, its presence feeling more like a threat than protection in the morning sunlight that should have made everything seem safe and normal. "Daddy, why is Scout acting weird?" Penny asked, her child's intuition picking up on the sudden tension that filled the house like smoke from an invisible fire. Rachel's hand moved instinctively to her hip, where her service weapon would normally rest. But of course it wasn't there, because she was defenseless in a house full of innocent people, and Henderson knew exactly where to find her. "Owen, mind if I come in? I need to ask Detective Brooks a few follow-up questions about her accident." Henderson's voice carried the kind of authority that wasn't really asking permission, his tone suggesting that refusal would create problems nobody wanted to deal with. Rachel heard Owen's reluctant agreement, followed by heavy footsteps crossing the hardwood floor toward the kitchen, where domestic tranquility was about to be shattered by forces beyond anyone's control. Henderson appeared in the doorway like a storm cloud given human form, his pale eyes scanning the domestic scene with calculating intelligence that missed nothing and forgave less. "Detective Brooks, feeling better, I hope?" His smile was all teeth and no warmth, making Scout growl low in his throat while positioning himself between the sheriff and the family he'd sworn to protect. Rachel felt every instinct screaming at her to run, but running would only confirm Henderson's suspicions and put the Carters in even greater danger than they already faced. Henderson pulled out his notebook with theatrical precision, clicking his pen like a countdown timer that measured the seconds until someone said something that couldn't be taken back. "I'll need you to walk me through exactly what happened on the mountain pass, every detail you can remember from the moment you left Denver until Owen found you in the snow." His emphasis on every carried implications that made Rachel's blood run cold, because they both knew this wasn't really about gathering information for a case file. She was being tested, and the wrong answer could mean death for everyone in this kitchen who'd shown her kindness. I remember driving up the pass in deteriorating weather conditions, then waking up in the hospital with this bandage around my head. Everything in between is pretty much a blank slate." It was a lie, wrapped in medical plausibility. But Henderson's expression suggested he wasn't buying the amnesia story any more than she'd expected him to. Scout moved closer to Rachel, positioning himself between her and the sheriff with deliberate intent that wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The kitchen fell silent except for the soft bubbling of the coffee pot and Scout's increasingly agitated breathing. The tension so thick it seemed to have physical weight pressing down on everyone present. Rachel felt like she was balanced on a knife's edge, one wrong word away from disaster that would destroy this innocent family who'd done nothing but help a stranger in need. Owen stepped forward, his presence filling the space between Henderson and his houseguest with protective determination that spoke of a man who'd already lost one woman he cared about and wasn't planning to lose another. "Sheriff, maybe we should let Detective Brooks recover completely before subjecting her to intensive questioning. Head injuries can affect memory in unpredictable ways, and pushing too hard might actually interfere with her healing process." Henderson's laugh was as cold as winter wind through bare trees, carrying undertones that promised retribution for anyone who got in his way. "Just being thorough, Owen. Denver Police Department is very interested in what happened to one of their detectives, and they're sending someone up to conduct their own investigation." The threat was clear as crystal. Rachel's time was running out, and Henderson wanted her to know it before her backup arrived and complicated his plans. After Henderson left, the house felt like a crime scene awaiting the arrival of forensic specialists who would catalogue evidence of innocence destroyed by forces beyond anyone's control. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, her coffee growing cold, while her mind raced through possibilities and escape routes that all seemed to lead to more danger for the people who'd saved her life. Owen sent Penny upstairs to get ready for school, then settled into the chair across from Rachel with the patience of a man accustomed to waiting for truth to surface in its own time. "You're not really here about an accident, are you?" His voice was gentle but firm, inviting honesty without demanding it, while Scout positioned himself at Rachel's feet like a furry anchor in a storm of uncertainty. Rachel studied Owen's face, the laugh lines around his eyes, the premature grey at his temples, the steady strength that had carried him through his wife's death and single parenthood without breaking under the weight of loss and responsibility. This man deserved the truth, but the truth could get him and his daughter killed by people who eliminated problems rather than solving them. "I'm investigating Sheriff Henderson and several members of his department," Rachel said finally, the words feeling like stepping off a cliff into empty space where safety nets didn't exist. "Corruption, evidence tampering, possibly accessory to murder in cases that should have been prosecuted but somehow disappeared from the system." Owen's face went through several emotions: shock, understanding, and finally grim determination that transformed his features into something harder and more dangerous than she'd expected from a small-town handyman. That's why Scout reacted to him the way he did, why the dog positioned himself protectively from the moment Henderson walked through our door. Rachel nodded, remembering how the golden retriever had positioned himself between the sheriff and the family he'd claimed as his own. "Your dog has better instincts than most cops I know, can read people in ways that would make professional interrogators jealous." Owen's smile was sad but proud, his hand moving to stroke Scout's golden fur with the automatic gesture of a man who'd learned to trust his dog's judgment about people and situations. "Lisa always said Scout could read intentions better than a polygraph machine, that he never made mistakes about who deserved trust and who represented danger. How much danger are we in?" Owen's question was practical, focused on protecting his daughter rather than dwelling on fear that wouldn't help anyone survive what was coming. Rachel appreciated his directness more than he could know, because sugarcoating the truth would only get people killed when they needed clear information to make life or death decisions. "I don't know exactly. But if Henderson thinks I'm helpless and recovering from amnesia, that gives us some advantage in terms of planning our next moves." She paused, studying Owen's face for signs of regret about getting involved in something that could destroy his quiet life. Instead, she saw resolution hardening his features like steel cooling in a forge, his protective instincts fully engaged by the threat to his family's safety. "We have maybe a week before this situation explodes into something nobody can control, before federal investigators arrive and either help us or eliminate us depending on how high this corruption reaches." Scout's tail thumped against the floor, as if agreeing with her assessment, while Owen reached across the table and covered Rachel's hand with his own. His calloused fingers were warm against her skin, offering comfort and alliance in equal measure. "Then we better figure out how to end this before it gets that far, because I've already lost one woman I cared about, and I'm not planning to make it a habit." The plan they developed was simple enough to work and complicated enough to get them killed if any element went wrong. Rachel would play the role of recovering victim while secretly gathering evidence of Henderson's corruption, using her law enforcement training to build a case that would stand up in federal court. Owen would use his position as a local handyman to access buildings and overhear conversations that might prove useful, his familiarity with the town's residents providing cover for intelligence gathering that would seem suspicious coming from an outsider. Scout, with his uncanny ability to sense danger and deception, would serve as their early warning system while maintaining his role as beloved family pet, who drew no attention from enemies. It felt like playing chess against a grandmaster while blindfolded, but it was their only chance to survive long enough for justice to matter more than political expedience. "If this goes sideways," Rachel said, gripping Owen's hands across the kitchen table while Scout watched with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand every word. "Promise me you'll take Penny and disappear. Don't look back. Don't try to save me. Just run as far and fast as you can until you find somewhere safe." Owen's smile was gentle but implacable, carrying the kind of determination that had gotten him through his wife's death and would carry him through whatever came next. That afternoon, while Penny was at school and Owen was fixing Mrs. Patterson's kitchen sink, Rachel made her first move in a game that would determine whether truth or corruption won the battle for one small Montana town. She walked to the Millbrook Falls post office, using the public computer to send an encrypted message to her contact at the FBI field office in Denver, carefully coded language that would request immediate backup without revealing her location to anyone monitoring communications. The message was simple on its surface: evidence of corruption in local law enforcement, requesting immediate investigation and protection for potential witnesses who might be in danger from people with badges and government authority. What she didn't expect was the response that came back within minutes, words that made her blood turn to ice water in her veins. "Case compromised. Trust no one in law enforcement. Federal investigation already underway, but corruption reaches high levels. Maintain cover and await extraction instructions." Rachel stared at the screen until the words blurred, finally understanding that she wasn't just hunting corruption in one small town. She was trapped inside a conspiracy that reached far beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Scout was waiting for her outside the post office, his presence both comforting and alarming because the dog had somehow escaped from the Carter house and tracked her across town without making a sound. "How did you get here, boy?" Rachel knelt to scratch behind his ears, but Scout's attention was focused on something beyond her shoulder that made his hackles rise with warning. She turned to see Henderson's patrol car cruising slowly down Main Street. The sheriff's pale eyes locked onto her through the windshield with the intensity of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. He didn't stop, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge her presence in any way that casual observers would notice. But his message was clear as daylight. She was being watched, catalogued, measured for elimination when the time was right. Scout's low growl confirmed what Rachel already knew as they watched the patrol car disappear around the corner, its occupant already planning the next move in a game where innocent families were expendable casualties. She needed to get back to Owen and Penny before Henderson decided to stop playing games and start eliminating witnesses who knew too much about federal crimes disguised as local law enforcement. The walk home felt like crossing a minefield in the dark, every shadow potentially hiding threats, while every passerby could be an informant reporting her movements to people who made problems disappear permanently. Scout pressed close to her side, his warm bulk offering comfort and protection in equal measure, while his head swiveled constantly to track sounds that human ears couldn't detect. The golden retriever's senses were alert for dangers that Rachel's human limitations couldn't identify, his training manifesting in ways that suggested Lisa had prepared him for more than simple search and rescue operations. Halfway home, he stopped abruptly and whined, a sound Rachel had never heard him make before now. Following his gaze, she saw a black sedan parked across from the elementary school, its occupants too far away to identify, but close enough to make her skin crawl with recognition of professional surveillance. Federal agents or private contractors had a particular stillness about them, a predatory patience that marked them as clearly as uniforms would have done. Henderson wasn't working alone in his corruption, and whoever his partners were, they were escalating the situation beyond what a small-town sheriff could handle without outside resources and government authority. Owen was waiting in his workshop behind the house, ostensibly organizing tools, but actually watching the street through the grimy window, while his hands moved with the automatic efficiency of someone whose mind was focused on problems more serious than home repair. Rachel slipped in through the back door, Scout at her heels, and immediately felt the electric tension that comes before storms break and lightning strikes everything in its path. "We have a problem," she said without preamble, her voice carrying the kind of urgency that made Owen drop his wrench and give her his complete attention. "The FBI is already investigating, which means this corruption goes higher than Henderson and reaches levels that can compromise federal agencies. And there are professional watchers positioned near the elementary school, where your daughter spends her days." Owen's face went white as fresh snow, his hands clenching involuntarily as the full implications of her words sank into his consciousness like stones dropping into deep water. "Penny," he whispered, the single word carrying all the fear and fury of a parent whose child is threatened by forces beyond his control or understanding. Rachel nodded grimly, her own protective instincts fully engaged by the threat to an innocent 8-year-old whose only crime was having a father who helped strangers in need. The decision to run felt like admitting defeat, but staying felt like signing death warrants for innocent people whose only mistake was showing kindness to a stranger bleeding in the snow. Owen called the school and arranged to pick Penny up early, citing a family emergency that wasn't far from the truth, while his voice remained steady enough to avoid raising suspicions among staff who knew him as a reliable single father. Rachel packed her few belongings while Scout paced restlessly between the bedroom and the window, his anxiety growing with each passing minute as he sensed the adult's distress and responded with protective instincts that went beyond normal canine behavior. The house that had felt like sanctuary now felt like a trap, its windows offering too many sightlines for shooters, while its doors provided too few escape routes for a man carrying an 8-year-old girl through territory controlled by enemies with government resources. "Where do we go?" Owen asked, shouldering a duffel bag packed with Penny's clothes and favorite toys, his voice steady, despite the circumstances that were forcing his family to become refugees in their own country. Rachel's smile was grim as winter dawn, her mind already calculating routes and safe houses that might offer temporary protection from people who made careers out of eliminating inconvenient witnesses. They left the house like refugees fleeing a war zone, taking only what they could carry while abandoning everything else to whatever fate awaited families, who asked uncomfortable questions about corruption that reached federal levels. Owen's truck started on the second try, the engine's rumble sounding loud as thunder in the afternoon quiet, while Scout jumped into the back, and Rachel rode shotgun with her eyes constantly scanning for threats that could materialize from any direction without warning. The elementary school sat 3 blocks away, close enough to reach quickly, but far enough to feel like crossing an ocean under enemy fire, while professional watchers catalogued their movements for people who solved problems with bullets rather than bureaucracy. Owen's knuckles went white against the steering wheel as they drove past the black sedan, its occupants now clearly visible as 2 men in dark suits who watched their passage with the kind of professional interest that promised violence in the very near future. "They're not even trying to hide their surveillance anymore," Rachel murmured, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon that still wasn't there, because she was defenseless in a world where badges and government authority had been turned against innocent families. Owen's jaw tightened with determination that looked exactly like his wife's in old photographs, his protective instincts fully engaged by threats that made normal parenting concerns seem trivial by comparison. Penny Carter emerged from Millbrook Falls Elementary with her backpack bouncing and a smile that could power the entire town, her 8-year-old innocence intact despite the dangerous forces gathering around her family, like storm clouds heavy with lightning. She saw her father's truck and broke into a run, her small legs carrying her toward safety, without knowing that danger existed in forms she couldn't imagine or understand. Owen's heart nearly exploded with relief and terror as she climbed into the cab, chattering about her day while Scout licked her face in greeting that seemed more desperate than usual. "Miss Rachel, are you feeling better? Mrs. Henderson said you got hurt real bad in the snow and might have to go back to Denver soon." Penny's innocent words hit Rachel like physical blows, each syllable carrying implications that made her blood run cold with understanding. Mrs. Henderson, the sheriff's wife, had been discussing her condition with elementary school children, which meant the web of surveillance and information gathering ran deeper than she'd imagined. Owen caught Rachel's eye in the rearview mirror, his expression confirming that he'd heard the implications too, and understood what it meant when enemies wore friendly faces and used children as unwitting informants. The road to the abandoned mining camp wound up into the mountains like a serpent seeking higher ground, its switchbacks and steep grades testing Owen's truck, while Scout hung his head out the back with his golden fur streaming in the wind like a battle flag. Penny had fallen asleep against Rachel's shoulder, exhausted by the day's excitement and unaware that her life had just been turned upside down by forces beyond her understanding or control. "She's going to ask questions when she wakes up," Owen said quietly, his eyes focused on the treacherous mountain road ahead, while his mind wrestled with how to explain to an 8-year-old that her government had become the enemy. Rachel nodded, studying the sleeping child's face in the dying afternoon light, while feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like lead blankets. "Kids are resilient. They adapt faster than adults when circumstances change suddenly. She'll understand enough to stay safe without needing to know details that would give her nightmares." But even as she spoke the words, Rachel felt the crushing weight of guilt that came from dragging this innocent family into her war through no fault of their own. Their safety now depended on her ability to outthink enemies who seemed to hold all the advantages in a game where the rules changed without notice and the stakes were measured in innocent lives. The old mining camp materialized out of the forest like something from a ghost story, its weathered buildings and rusted equipment speaking of dreams abandoned and fortunes lost to time and changing markets that cared nothing for human ambition. Owen parked the truck behind the largest structure, a maintenance shed that would hide their vehicle from casual observation, while providing some protection against the mountain weather that could turn deadly without warning. Scout leapt down and immediately began patrolling the perimeter, his nose working overtime to catalog scents, while his body language shifted into something more primal and focused on protection than companionship. The golden retriever's behavior had transformed from family pet to something wilder and more dangerous, his training manifesting in ways that Owen had never imagined would be necessary for protecting his daughter from their own government. Rachel surveyed their temporary sanctuary with tactical eyes, noting escape routes and defensive positions while trying not to think about how quickly their situation had deteriorated from rescue to refuge to what felt increasingly like a last stand against forces with unlimited resources and no regard for collateral damage, that included 8-year-old girls who'd done nothing but welcome a stranger into their home. As night settled over the mountains like a shroud woven from darkness and cold wind, Owen built a small fire in the old camp's stone hearth, while Penny explored their temporary home with the adaptability that made children such remarkable survivors in circumstances that would break most adults. Scout remained on guard duty, his ears constantly swiveling to track sounds that human senses couldn't detect, while his intelligent eyes reflected firelight like golden mirrors holding secrets. Rachel used Owen's phone to send another encrypted message to her FBI contact, this time requesting immediate extraction and witness protection for the Carter family, who'd been dragged into her investigation through nothing more than basic human decency. The response that came back made her blood run cold with implications that stretched far beyond local corruption. Extraction team compromised. Henderson has federal connections reaching cabinet level. Evidence suggests conspiracy involves multiple agencies. Trust no one in law enforcement. You're completely on your own. She stared at the screen until the words blurred, finally understanding the true scope of what they were facing and why so many previous investigators had simply disappeared without trace or explanation. Owen found her sitting by the dying fire. Scout curled at her feet like a golden guardian, while shadows danced on the cabin walls like ghosts of people who'd asked too many questions about government corruption. Penny was asleep in one of the camp's bunk beds, wrapped in Lisa's old sleeping bag and dreaming innocent dreams that tomorrow might shatter forever if their enemies decided to stop playing games and start eliminating witnesses. "Bad news?" Owen asked, settling beside Rachel on the rough wooden bench, while his eyes searched her face for signs of hope that might still exist somewhere in their increasingly desperate situation. She showed him the message, watching his face cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally grim acceptance of reality that most Americans never had to confront. "So we're alone," he said simply, his voice carrying the kind of calm that comes after all illusions have been stripped away. "Just us, against however many people want us dead for knowing too much about federal crimes disguised as local law enforcement." Rachel nodded, surprised by how peaceful she felt now that the worst-case scenario had become their reality, and all pretense of government protection had been revealed as lies designed to keep citizens compliant, while corruption consumed their democracy from within. The final confrontation began at dawn, with the sound of helicopters echoing across the valley like mechanical thunder promising death from above. Scout's behavior shifted into something that belonged in military operations rather than civilian life, the Golden Retriever's training revealing depths that spoke of preparations for warfare rather than simple search and rescue operations. Rachel checked the weapons cache they'd found in Lisa's supplies, while Owen prepared defensive positions that his dead wife had apparently selected years ago for exactly this kind of scenario. The dog's transformation from family pet to something wilder and more dangerous was complete now, his every movement calculated to protect the little girl who represented innocence in a world that had forgotten what that word meant. Through the morning mist, federal agents began surrounding their position with tactical efficiency that spoke of resources unlimited by budget constraints or constitutional concerns about due process. The Golden Retriever understood that protecting this family meant more than physical defense. It meant preserving hope in a world where government had become the enemy of its own people. The battle that followed would be remembered by the few survivors as the moment when ordinary citizens finally fought back against a system that had forgotten its purpose and betrayed its foundational principles. Owen fought with the desperation of a father protecting his daughter, while Rachel used her law enforcement training to coordinate their defense against overwhelming odds. Scout moved through the chaos like a golden ghost, his extraordinary abilities finally revealed as something far beyond anything normal training could produce. When the smoke cleared and the mountain fell silent once more, the forces of corruption lay defeated by a family who'd refused to surrender their freedom to people who wore badges while serving masters other than justice. In the end, it wasn't government resources or federal authority that won the day. It was love transformed into something more powerful than any weapon in the official arsenal, guided by a dog who understood that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the odds against survival.